Board. So I figured we'll get the kind of boring stuff out of the way first, the first hour of the lecture. These are all just kind of random topics that you may have either heard me talk about or just want to kind of get in your head at the beginning of the cohort. So as you start feeling them or techniques that you can start using throughout the cohort. And then for the second half of class, we will do a car project. So I will explain that just to get you excited about it. And then we'll dive into that in the second half of class. So I am going to pose the question to you. Imagine a eccentric, maybe well-known car CEO comes to you and says, I would like you to design the touchscreen for my car. That car is going to be 90% controlled from that touchscreen. Go. Well, that's a really daunting project, right? And what you guys are going to run into is that's what you're going to run into in your capstone. And that's what you're going to run into for every single project we do in class. That is kind of the classic engineer's lament of, well, how do we get started on this, right? You get that shell shock of this is such a big project. How do we even get started? And 99% of the time, the answer is not on your computer. It is not in the code. It is planning, right? And so you guys probably got into the cohort because you're excited to learn to code. And while that is 100% required, there's a lot of steps that happen before we dive into our code, right? And you're going to see that throughout all the projects that we do in class. It isn't going to just be, hey, let's get started on the code. Let's dive right in. And oftentimes, when you get stuck in your code, the right answer is to take a step back and to use some techniques and planning to kind of figure out how to go about that. So we're going to work together on that car project, and you guys are going to be able to ask me as the eccentric car CEO questions, right? And we're going to get some answers to those questions. We're going to start kind of planning through how those features look. And then the step after that will be after we get all the requirements together, figuring out how can we break into groups because no company has an engineering team of 20 engineers, right? 20 people all attacking the same thing. No, it makes a lot more sense to break out into teams, figure out what they're working on, and make sure everyone's kind of collaborating together. So that's what we're going to do in the second half of class, just to get you excited about it. With all of that said, before we dive into that, there is something in the industry called stand-up. Has anyone heard of stand-up or done a stand-up? Anyone?
Isn't it just like a meeting to go over the current objectives or current status of the project that you're working on?
Exactly. So it's usually a daily meeting. Some teams do it less frequently. Some teams ask slightly different questions, but usually the questions are, what did you do yesterday or since your last stand-up? What are you planning on accomplishing today or before our next stand-up? And do you have any roadblocks or concerns? And the wording of those questions is a lot more important than you may realize, right? Because we had a question that said, do you have any roadblocks? And the team kept on saying, nope, no roadblocks. And then I got into a one-on-one with someone 3 weeks later, and they were like, I have all of these concerns. And I'm like, well, why didn't you ask about them, right? Why didn't you bring that up sooner? Why? And you said, well, you asked, do you have any roadblocks? That means, am I blocked on anything? That doesn't necessarily mean concern, which is I'm concerned about this other member of our team being able to accomplish a goal. And so the wording of those questions, even though it doesn't seem important, really can impact the entire team dynamic. So I try and start every class with yesterday being the exception with stand up. Right. And that's a way to kind of get the juices flowing, right? We may have been coming from a work day. We have no idea what our lives are before 5:30. And it's a really good opportunity to not only reflect on, hey, what are we doing today? What are we planning on doing? What's on the agenda? Let's make sure everyone knows what's coming. But also, what did we accomplish yesterday? What did we learn? What were those concepts that are starting to kind of seep in? Because if we can retrospectively look at what we learned yesterday, we can also get a better idea of using that momentum to get into today's class. So while stand up isn't necessarily used in the classroom setting, I personally think it's really important because we're using all of that momentum from yesterday to build on those concepts today. So I already kind of gave you a quick little rundown of what's coming up. I did stand up somewhat in reverse order, but let's go back to yesterday. What are some concepts that we learned yesterday that are sinking in, that really resonated with us? What did we do yesterday? And just shout it out. Don't need to raise your hands. Yes. So I don't know how good the mic is remotely, but we said we listed out the tech stacks yesterday. We started categorizing them and seeing that how they fit together, where the overlaps are, and how while there are probably hundreds of thousands of different programming languages, at the end of the day, they all kind of simplify down into, well, what do we use them for? And once we know what we use them for, it's easier to detect the overlap and kind of figure out what to learn from there. What else did we do yesterday?
Categorize them.
Categorize them. Yep.
We also learned that although there's like a bunch of the databases, languages, we don't always use all of them and they're not always up to date or popular.
Absolutely. So it's not just about the databases, it's all of them, right? There are older programming languages, just like there are older databases. And some of them kind of fall out of favor or are not used anymore in favor of newer tools. So that is definitely the case. And then there are five different SQL variants right off the top of my head that are used very commonly, but we don't need to know all five of them in order to effectively use SQL itself. Anything else from yesterday that kind of stuck out, that resonated? The big picture, yeah. So the big picture of, well, what's a tech stack, right? You guys have probably heard of that. In your learning, when you're getting started, you have to kind of pick a tech stack of which one you're learning, even if you do that along the way. And so the big picture is really helpful in kind of knowing where those pieces fit together and how all of our code is going to interact as we're building it. Anything else from yesterday? Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Networking in physical spaces, right? Kind of important, right? We think about ourselves as on the computer and in this virtual world, but at the end of the day, you guys are all part of the greater Syracuse community, right? And that's kind of the beauty of where Hack Upstate started, was we started hosting hackathons, which were bringing employers and community members together to kind of work on code together and create something really amazing in like a 24-hour period. And while the Tech Garden is under construction, just a block down the road, we are hoping to host hackathons again once that space is reopened, because they're an amazing networking community. Unfortunately, that won't be for about another year, but yeah, the whole notion of being part of a community, being students together, having access to a space like Common Space, but then also the tools like Slack and how we can collaborate together, and networking in general, right? Taking that day off a month for Open Hack, so that you can meet with other developers and really get part of that community. And while that's really good for you as students, that's also really important for the job aspect. The statistic is widely argued, but well over half of the jobs that you get are all through networking, right? That's either coming from me and me personally recommending, saying, hey, I've got a friend who's hiring. That's through working with Laura, who was our career coach, who will be in, if not this next Monday, the following Monday, I think next Monday, to kind of talk about the career assignments and start diving in there a little bit more. And that's just being part of the Hack Upstate and the Open Hack developer communities, and a couple other networking opportunities like guest speaking, all very, very important to getting started. Anything else from yesterday? Yeah. Absolutely. AI versus not AI. You will have detected that I'm very hesitant on AI. And that is not because I don't believe it's the future. I definitely do. But I don't believe it is the doomsday scenario that we're going to all be killed by AI in a couple of years, or lose our jobs to it either. So I'm actively working every Sunday. I'm sitting down and reviewing our curriculum and going, all right, where can I kind of pepper in a little bit more of AI and ChatGPT, and recognizing that that is a emergent tool, but also a tool that is not totally derailing our careers and our futures. So we'll be reviewing AI and kind of peppering it in as the course goes. Anything else?
Tech stack that we use.
The tech stack we're using, yes. So it is, we call it the CERN stack, technically. I don't think I mentioned that yesterday. But SQL, Express, React, and Node, that is where we will end up. That is not necessarily where we will start, right? So we're starting with HTML and CSS. We will use those concepts in our React app as we get into it. But the tech stack we are using is SQL, Express, React, and Node. We'll also be peppering in DevOps, HTML, CSS, the career module, of course, APIs, and there may be one other module that I'm forgetting off the top of my head. But that is all coming down the pipeline. And I also don't want you guys to panic at how much there is to learn. 6 months, while it may not seem it, is a good time to pack all of those different concepts in. So if you're feeling a little bit anxious, give it a day or two next week, right? Wait until we get going Monday or Tuesday, and you'll see that, oh, this code maybe isn't as intimidating, right? And our projects are well practiced at this point to make sure that the skills kind of all build on each other. And by the time we get to the end of the module, you will either be begging for mercy because you are so bored of these concepts, you're ready for something new, or you will be pleading with me that you are a little stuck at the end and you're ready for a new concept to kind of carry you into that. So the good news is because all of our modules are only about 4 weeks or less, there's plenty of new content. So if you get stuck at any point, definitely reach out for those one-on-ones. Definitely use all of those links in Canvas. And on Thursday, we'll have our mentor networking event. So when the going gets tough, we will have plenty of support for you to help out there. Anything else? Okay, so speaking of that, why are we all here? Well, we're all here to learn how to code, but you can't just go into the job market and be like, I'd like to code, please, and get a job, right? As much as we would like to. So, what we have put together, or actually, Christy Pressler has put together, who has been a great member of the Syracuse community. Unfortunately, she has moved away, but is still active in our community and reachable on Slack. She put together this great visual, right? And as I've mentioned in the past, I'm not the most visual person, but I think that this diagram can really help you understand, all right, where are we going? Because you may not be fully qualified to do all of these jobs by the end of the cohort, but I think by exposing them kind of at the beginning of the cohort, it gets you thinking of, hey, this program can really get me to the point of being able to dive into all of this. So where do you fit? Where does our curriculum fit? I think the most is this full stack developer. We've already covered what a stack is, right? That is using all of these front end and back end and database technologies to kind of combine it all together. So you kind of fit almost right in the center of this as full stack developer. However, our industry in particular, the tech industry, is really bad at agreeing on what we call a full stack developer. So you may find that someone is hiring for a website developer and they would like you to only work on the front end. Or you may see a job posting for website developer, but they actually mean they would like you to be a full stack developer because they need you to do the back end and the database as well. So, quality assurance engineer is kind of in that same area. Quality assurance is all about testing the full stack developers or the what they are creating, right? So, quality assurance is basically testing of, okay, this developer made this thing before it goes out to the public internet. Let me try and break it so that we don't ship things to our customers that are going to break. Kind of related to that, we go up and down the stack. If we go up the stack, we work our way up to front end. You may find at the end of this that you're like, turns out coding is not for me. But you know what is for me? I really loved what we did today, which is all of the design work, right? Figuring out, working with clients, getting the requirements together, and then designing it, right? You don't need to write a line of code to design a user interface. And that's the tool that we'll be learning today called Figma, or tomorrow. I don't know when we'll get to it, but either today or tomorrow, where we can start looking at colors, we can start looking at spacing, we can start looking at layout and figuring out, hey, how do I design this user interface? So that is the front end. And then we can go a step up, and that gets into visual design and product design, right? And you can see these titles are kind of overlapping, but the visual design and product design is really getting into, we don't touch a line of code. The front end is a step into the code of saying, I only work on front end code. The full stack developer is someone who is spanning both front end and back end and maybe DevOps, depending on what small or what size company you're in. Then you start working your way down into the back end, and that's all the server side of things. But the back end may be a data analyst or a data miner. A data miner is just going on other sites and writing code to extract that data out of the website. We also sometimes hear that as a scraper as well. And so system analyst, system engineer, data developer, these are all things that companies don't fully agree on what that specific role is, which is why a job description is so important, right? You really want to read that, because every time that you apply for a job, you really want to be reading the job description and telling the employer how you're going to do that job well. Even if you are a full stack developer at the end of this program, if you're applying for a systems engineer position or a back-end developer position, that back-end developer cover letter should be highlighting things in that job description, right? Oh, I see that you use Python as your backend. I learned Node.js, and I'm very excited to apply those similar concepts to Python, right? And Laura's going to dive into cover letters and all kinds of stuff there. And then finally, we've got DevOps down at the bottom, right? And DevOps is the kind of covers everything on top of it. It isn't necessarily building everything on top of it. It's getting it out on the internet, right? It's taking the what the developers are producing and operationalizing it, hence the name DevOps. And so all different kinds of DevOps that happen, from help desk, which is, hey, a customer's calling and this isn't working, all the way to network engineer of, hey, we've got thousands of people working at this company or trying to access this code. We need to make sure that they can get to it, to IT asset manager, which is something that I do for all of you, right? All of these laptops have to be tracked. This is $20,000 worth of laptops, and we got to make sure that we've got the serial numbers and all of that information and track that, all the way over to the security side of things, right? How do we make sure that the computers are secure? How do we make sure that the cloud that all of these apps are running on are secure? And you know what? This is the first time I've noticed after 4 cohorts of using this diagram that there is a repeat between cybersecurity analyst. Maybe Christy meant engineer on that. Anyway, so all things to think about. And then we also have all the tech adjacent roles, right? These people can't do their job without business empowering them. So we've got everyone from a project manager who is going to make sure that you are on task, make sure that you don't have any roadblocks, make sure that you have all the support you need to break things down, to search engine optimization, which is, hey, you've made this website, but your website isn't good unless anyone can find it on Google, right? which isn't always true, but for the most part. And so SEO is really the science of reverse engineering Google's algorithm to make sure that your website climbs the ranks. And of course, we have things like managers and team leads. Metadata cataloger is someone who is managing such a big content library that they need the pieces of information about that content to be able to manage it. Business analyst is someone who is kind of bridging the gap between the business team and the development team and the customer. And then Scrum Master is a very specific term for project management. And there are all kinds of certifications that you can get on project management, which is something that a lot of our graduates go on to do, right? They get all of this technical experience and then they go, hey, what I really want to be doing is managing other developers and kind of helping them make sure that they don't have any roadblocks. And the project management world is a whole thing that you can step into. Anyway, I'm going to pause here for a second. Does anyone have questions about the roles? Yes. The arrows are kind of like where you can step into. So you can start as a front end developer and then become an engineer and then work your way to a UI engineer. And they kind of also mean that some companies use these terms interchangeably. So it's, some companies are like, oh, you start as a developer, you work your way to an engineer, and then you work your way to a senior engineer. Some companies will say you start in front end web development, and then you start learning our back end, and then you become full stack. So it really depends on the company's organization, but the arrows are meant to say like these are the most interrelated jobs, basically. Or exactly the same job, apparently, in the bottom.
What is cloud?
Yeah, so cloud is cloud and cyber. You were totally right. Totally right. Did not see that. Thank you. Any questions on job titles? Okie doke. And remotely too, if you guys have any questions, feel free to come off mute. We can hear you in the classroom. Okay. Okay. So when we think about projects, right? We like to think as developers, we like to think about how we're going to tackle that project. But at the end of the day, there are multiple stakeholders. And if you haven't heard of stakeholders before, that's totally fine. But what we like to do is at the beginning of the project, it's not only important to know who's on your team that's working on this, but who is everyone involved with this project, right? That's not only the business analysts that are helping you communicate with the customers. That may be the customer, that may be a project manager. There are all different kinds of roles, and we kind of started to see that in that job titles chart. But it's really important. The first thing that I do when I'm hired at a new company or working on a new project is I like to get a list of everyone who's working on it, because you would be surprised how many times you come into a project and they don't know who's working on it, right? They don't know their responsibilities. So really a good idea to kind of come in whenever you're starting at a new project. And if your manager doesn't do this for you, it's a great thing to say, hey, can you give me a rundown of a list of all of the project stakeholders and their titles? Because you really don't want to go into your first meeting without doing a little research, right? Without understanding who's in that meeting and what are they supposed to be doing. Because there have been times that I've made a total ass of myself, right? I've come in and pretended to be an expert in something, and it turns out that there's already an expert on the call who is doing that. So understanding that not only, even though it's a technical project, even though you may be building software, also understanding that there are a lot of different people involved in executing on a project. And so doing your homework on that, maybe not on day one of the job, but in the first couple of weeks, understanding who is involved beyond just your team and what roles are they playing in helping that project come together, especially on the business side of things, can be very helpful. Kind of common sense, but also one of those things keep in the back of your mind in 6 months from now when you're starting your jobs and just getting going and have that intimidation, kind of reset back to today, right? And think about that advice. Okay. Um, Couple quick things, and then we will dive into the requirements gathering. I promise you that this week is the most lecture heavy. After this, everything is hands-on and code. So bear with me for a little bit more. Has anyone heard of imposter syndrome or remember the homework reading? Whoever. Doesn't matter.
Oh, I'm sorry. You feel like you don't belong.
Feel like you don't belong, right? It's exactly what it sounds like. Imposter. What's it feel like to be an imposter? Well, you guys are going to be going through this, and you may not feel like an imposter. You may not think of that word, but as you're going through this, you're going to be like, everyone else seems to be getting this. Why am I not getting this? Am I the problem? To quote Taylor Swift, it's me. I'm the problem. It's me. No, it's not, right? Yeah.
If you're asking like the instructor, like throughout many things, like any topic or any questions, you'll feel like, oh, I'm just being handheld and I feel like I can do this alone. When people indicated that we could or
Absolutely. And so a lot of that comes down to when you're feeling that, one of the best ways to battle it is use that back channel and be like, hey, is anyone else not getting this? Is anyone else feeling a little off? And if you get no response, you're like, okay, well, maybe I need to step it up a little bit, right? And maybe I need to reach out for a one-on-one. Maybe I need a little help with this. But the flip side of that is 90% of the time, the response you're going to get is, oh yeah, everyone else is not getting this. We need help to get through this. Someone should let Max know none of us are picking up what he's putting down, basically, right? So imposter syndrome it's easy to spiral because you think that you don't belong. The best way to battle not belonging is ask everyone else who is learning the same thing, going through the same thing as you in a similar life situation to go, hey, let me communicate through this a little bit, right? Let me try and combat this syndrome because at some point in the program, you're going to go, I know they're proud of their admissions process, but they missed something in me, right? I should not be in here. That is not the case, right? That imposter syndrome will kick in at some point. And if you don't feel comfortable talking about that with me, that's totally fine. I understand. You're going to have a mentor and you're also going to have Jason. Jason's our student success representative. I know he posted in Slack. Use him as a resource. He has been through six cohort, or this will be his sixth cohort. He's been through 5 cohorts of this. He is a literal professional at battling imposter syndrome, right? Whether that is techniques to go, hey, that's really just you feeling this, and that's not the case, right? Let's help you understand. Let's help you build the confidence to realize that's not the case. Or whether that's going, you're feeling this imposter syndrome because you're stuck on this thing. If we can get you unstuck on this thing, you're not going to feel that imposter syndrome anymore, right? And so the reason why we spend time on this on day 2 of the class is because I think if we ask graduates of the class, did you feel imposter syndrome at some point, we would have 100% response rate, right? So we like to call it out. We like to label it because if you know you're feeling it, all of a sudden you know how to combat it. And if you don't know how to combat it, you know that if you're feeling it, it's time to reach out for help and kind of talk through that. I will say a good quarter, third of the one-on-one sessions I have, we don't touch a line of code. All we do is it's a therapy session, right? To clarify, I'm not a licensed therapist, but a lot of times it's just talking through it. And that kind of brings me into my next point of rubber ducking. Has anyone heard of rubber ducking? Yeah.
We'll have a literally talk about on your desk, and as you're going through, you explain it to the doc and understand.
That is exactly it. And so for you guys remote, rubber ducking is when you literally talk to a rubber duck on your desk. I am fully aware of how insane that sounds, but they've actually done psychological studies on this, right? And so the story is a manager comes in one day and goes, "Why is there a rubber duck on your desk?" And the developer goes, "Oh, I talked to Bob." Everyone's like, you've named your rubber duck? And the developer goes, Bob has helped me through more problems than anyone else on this team. And the manager is like, what are you talking about? Well, it turns out they've done psychological studies because when you're in your head, you are literally in your head, right? You're trying to solve something. And what really helps is when you look at an object and talk to it, because when you talk to it, you have to use another part of your brain, right? You have to be able to say, all right, in order for me to solve this problem, I have to be able to articulate what the problem is. And sometimes we get so focused on solving the problem, we lose sight of what we're trying to solve. And so another good technique is actually write down, right? Have a piece of paper or actually open a notebook on your computer, the notes app, and type out the problem that you're having, because so many times you'll start to do that and go, I've been working on this for so long, I forget what I was trying to solve in the first place. Or, oh, I forgot that this was a piece of it. I didn't even realize that the line above was causing the problem, not this actual line, right? And so that's what rubber ducking is all about. And when I bring in your monitors tomorrow, I will do my best to remember to bring in my rubber duck collection that you can choose from. I know I sound insane, but um, because you're getting out of your head, you're using a different part of your brain to communicate the problem. And even if that doesn't get you out of the jam, even if Bob the rubber duck does not solve the problem for you, you have now articulated that problem enough that you can go ask for help, not only online, but of fellow students, of me, of your entire support network, right? And so that's what rubber ducking is all about, is not just articulating the problem, but also realizing that articulating the problem can clear roadblocks for you or lead you into your support network to solve the problem. So tomorrow, as long as I remember, you will all get the first rubber duck for you, your first foray into the problem solving community. And Bob will be your first step. And if Bob, the rubber duck, cannot solve your problems, you can realize that you can articulate that problem enough to ask for help on it. Okay, I'm gonna just pause there for a second. Anyone have questions, comments on imposter syndrome, rubber ducking, anything that we've discussed? Yeah, absolutely. I do have a collection of rubber ducks. Both. So I'm not like going to my desk and shoving 20 rubber ducks off my desk. I do have a few of my favorite rubber ducks that I talk to about different problems because they're all different experts. They are not the same rubber duck, by the way. They are all themed rubber ducks. I have a pig rubber duck. I have all kinds of rubber ducks. There is a great YouTube video. I can't remember if I don't think it was James A. Caster. I'm blanking on. I think he's a British comedian. He does a great sketch on rubber ducks and how his roommate just about kicked him out over the rubber duck scenes that he staged. I will post that in Slack if I remember tonight. Really funny clip. But anyway, I also do have a large plethora of rubber ducks to give to you guys as well. So it is not fully just me having a rubber duck obsession. It is recognizing that it is a tool and sharing that with you guys. Like the little rubber duckies? Oh yeah, they're all little ones. I don't have any giant ones. Largely because they do have to fit on my desk so that I can make eye contact with them. But they are not just generic rubber ducks, which is where this all started.
So I have a Wrangler, so the duck thing is a Wrangler thing. So people duck your Jeep.
Yes.
So I have a bunch of ducks in my car. That's why when you talk about it, it's like, yeah, I got like a bunch on my dash.
Yes, yes. And you would be surprised if you just go on Amazon or eBay or whatever and search for rubber ducks. Like you would be amazed at the artistry of people making rubber ducks and then mass producing them. It's mind blowing. Anyway, partially joking about it, partially serious. Rubber ducking can be a great way to kind of talk through your problems. And then you'll also hear it used sometimes in a professional setting where, I'll have a colleague who is working on a problem, or I'll be at a spot where I'm like, I'm kind of stuck on this and I'm not really looking for your help, but I'm looking for someone to tell me I'm not insane. And so you can actually say, hey, I'm looking to rubber duck on an issue with someone. And that just means like, hey, hear me out. Let me kind of talk through this problem that I'm running into. And oftentimes just talking through the problem, even though they may not be an expert or even though they may not be providing feedback, is enough to kind of get you going again. So if Bob the rubber duck isn't enough, you can rubber duck with an actual person as well. And you don't need to name your duck Bob. That's just an example.
I had a question.
Yeah.
Uh, does it necessarily have to be a rubber duck, or can it be like something else, like a toy or something?
Yeah, can totally be anything. That is totally fine. Rubber ducking is just more the term that they've used for it. I don't actually know where the duck thing getting started is, other than the story of someone having a duck on their desk. I think I've heard in the past that like someone had their kid's toy that they brought in, and that's kind of where it got started. I've heard that, oh, it was just a bath toy that my kid wouldn't have noticed was gone. And so that's why I have a rubber duck. It also could be that rubber ducks are like a generic inanimate object. But if you want to have one of those screaming chickens that, make crazy sounds, like that's totally fine. Whatever you choose as your inanimate object. And then this process is also expanded to like being a phrase of like, hey, can I rubber duck this with you? Meaning like, I'm not asking you to actually do anything other than listen. But whatever object you would like to use, that is totally fine.
And another thing,
Yeah.
uh, how much did rubber ducking actually like help you throughout your journey, like when it comes to like the project that you've done in the past?
Yeah, absolutely. It definitely does, and it's something that I use to this day. I use it a little less infrequently now, kind of being more of a senior developer. But it's definitely something that I run into. I promise to not give you my whole bio yet, but I started with no I don't have a computer science degree. I don't have a bachelor's degree. I was primarily self-taught. I have taken a couple college classes in programming and program related things. But for the most part, I started by saying, I want to make an app. And I wanted to make an app as a 15-year-old, right, in high school. And that was kind of how my entire journey started. And as soon as I finished one thing, like Java was my first programming language, my first real programming language. I was like, all right, I want to build an app. And they were like, well, you got to go learn Objective-C for that, which is now Swift. So I went out and I learned Objective-C, right? And then I was like, well, I need a database. And they're like, you got to go learn SQL for that. So I took a SQL class. And then they were like, you need to learn server-side programming. And no one was teaching server-side programming. So I went out and taught myself that. But my first job, kind of out of after my college classes was working at a startup. And it was me and my boss. And my boss had programming experience, but hadn't written code for 20 years, right? And so oftentimes I would be talking through a problem with him, and he would be like, look, man, I haven't done this in a while, but just keep talking through it, right? And so I would use him as a rubber duck a lot, and I still do that to this day, right? 8 years later, I'm still working with this guy, and we actually just had lunch today, and the I still use him for that, right? I still will go to him and say, hey, I'm thinking about doing this next project. It's going to take a couple days, but we could also kind of skip it and push this off. And he'll go, well, rubber duck with me, right? Talk through that. So it doesn't always have to be a technical thing that you're stuck on. It can kind of just be, hey, let's just elaborate on your thinking here, because he's like, I trust you to make that decision, right? And oftentimes, as a senior developer and even as a junior developer, your boss, your manager is going to come to you and be like, you're the expert here. I don't know, right? And so using that rubber ducking can be really helpful to kind of talk through all of those things. So I still have my rubber duck on my desk. I still talk to the rubber duck. We are less close than we used to be as a junior developer, but they still stick around and help me through problems for sure.
I got one last question.
Yeah.
So how through your experience, how were you able to like kind of overcome, I can't say overcome, but in a way, how you keep imposter syndrome at bay? Like, what tricks did you use through your experience?
Absolutely. So the biggest, well, I would say the two biggest things to use are communicate, especially when you have a network like this. The 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 biggest thing I think people struggle with when they're coding is not having someone to lean on, right? Not knowing that there is a development community in Syracuse, or not knowing, kind of feeling like, well, I don't belong here, so if I don't belong, I'm not qualified to ask questions. And that is totally not the case, right? So when you have questions, ask them, lean on your community, whether that's in either of the Slack channels, whether that's with one-on-ones, however you're most comfortable communicating. I've gotten like 4-page emails from students before that have taken me hours to respond to, but they were all really legitimate questions, right? Some people get in their head and all they want to do is get it all out of their head and reread that email 10 times before they feel confident sending it. That's totally fine, right? The biggest thing is asking questions frequently will combat that imposter syndrome, because when you get the answers are great at combating the imposter syndrome, because you're like, oh, that wasn't a stupid question. That was a really good question that now that I know the answer to, I feel like I feel even more empowered. So that's one thing. And then the second would be project-based learning, right? Have that objective in mind, because you know you're excited about that thing that you're building. You know that you've got the light at the end of the tunnel. And when you're feeling that imposter syndrome, you can refocus on that light and be like, what's it going to take to get me there, right? What's it going to take to push me over that edge to make me feel like I can reach it? And so throughout my entire career, largely being self-taught, at least in what I do day to day for my job and what I teach, I've always had that project to go, all right, what am I trying to build? What resources am I can I use to learn how to build that? Is this thing that I'm building something that is going to be used? In college, I built a couple apps. Because I built those apps, I had a portfolio. Because I had a portfolio, the startup hired me. Because the startup hired me, I started teaching at boot camps. Because I'm teaching at boot camps, I'm teaching at Careers in Code today, right? So it's all kind of a domino effect. So when you're feeling that you can't really push over that first domino, when that imposter syndrome kicks in, maybe stop pushing on the domino and look up at the domino and go, why am I pushing on this, right? What project am I trying to build? Why am I excited about this? Why was I excited about this? Why am I learning this thing in particular, right? Why am I learning HTML? Why am I learning React? Let me go do a little research. Maybe I need to take a step back. Maybe I can't solve this problem right now. Maybe I need to go learn more about React or HTML or CSS or Node or whatever we're teaching, and remind yourself why this is important, right? How many other people have learned Node or React or whatever skill it is? And that can also kind of re-energize you of, all right, I'm going to push through this. I'm going to get through it. So communication, asking for help, and project-based learning are the two things I would say are the biggest way that I push through imposter syndrome. But at the end of the day, it's all about confidence, right? It's all about saying, I am who I am and I'm learning and I'm still a student. But because I am learning, that means I am open, I'm receptive, I'm a sponge. I need to just push through a little bit more, figure out the right resources for me here. And as soon as you do that, it becomes much easier to feel like you belong in the community. Sorry if that was a long answer, but hopefully that's answers your question.
Yeah, it's no problem.
Awesome. Any other questions, comments? Okay. I am almost done here. 2 more bullet points. These should be a little bit faster. We'll watch a quick video and then we will dive into starting to think about requirements. So I put celebrate different errors on here. I was pretty sure cohort 1 was going to put this on a t-shirt, because I said it so many times through that cohort that It almost became a catchphrase of mine, right? So celebrate different errors. What does that really mean? Well, while you're coding, you're going to run into an issue, right? Whether that error means that your content isn't showing up to the right of in the right spot where you want it to, whether that means you hit the run button and the computer gives you an FU and says, no, you did something wrong, all different kinds of errors, right? The problem isn't that you're running into an error. This particular phrase is when you run into the next error. What happens when you solve that first error and you run on and you think it's all going, and then all of a sudden you run into another problem? It isn't, let's just dive into that problem, let's solve it. Let's take a minute and go, whoa, I just made that other error disappear. So before I move on to the next one, before I just keep plowing through them, let me pat myself on the back. Let me say I got through that, right? Let me celebrate the fact that that error is gone. And that's not only important for your confidence and keeping momentum up, but that's also really important to say, did I understand that error and how I solved it? Because oftentimes we don't understand what the computer is trying to tell us until we figured out how to solve it. And now that we know how to solve it, the next time we get that error, we're going to go, wait, I already know how to fix this. I know where this problem is. So 90% of the time, we're going to get an error that we're like, WTF, right? I don't know what this means. I don't know what that word is. There is, 10 lines of text on the screen, and all of that's intimidating. I don't understand this, right? And you're going to hear me say, as much as celebrate different errors, you're going to hear me say, all right, go ahead and share your screen, and I'm going to stop my screen share. We'll practice in Zoom tomorrow on that. But we're going to look at it all together. And it's really important that not only you understand that error, but the other 19 students also understand that error, because you will feel me guilt you into saying, another student just had this issue 5 minutes ago. How did they solve it? And when you go, oh, I wasn't paying attention, there's a reason why we stopped class and had that person share their screen. It isn't to shame them into having that error. I'm going to have plenty of errors as I'm coding along. The reason why we stop class and have you share your screen is because you're guaranteed to have that error at some point as well, right? And so it isn't to call you out. It's to say, hey, everyone else, let's learn from this experience, because errors, while we say it's only human to error, it's also a programmer's kind of role to error, right? No one is perfect. No one is writing code right out of the gate. And so when we say celebrate different errors, we mean not only pay attention to the errors that you're having and kind of celebrate the wins when you get a different error or when you get it working, but also take a minute to do that retrospective, just like we did in stand-up this morning. It isn't just about saying, what am I doing today? It's also looking back and saying, all right, I got that error message. I did a bunch of research. I was stuck on that for 4 hours. It's not a big deal. I was stuck on it for 4 hours. What the big deal is I figured it out, right? I moved on beyond that, because your entire career, you're going to be solving for errors, right? I'd say 80% of, they say 100% of writing new code, 80% of it is solving for errors, and 20% of it is actually writing new code. That will be less the case kind of as you're in the cohort, only because I'm practiced with this code. But as you're working on your own code, just take a minute, pat yourself on the back and say, I'm making progress. And I also understand why I'm making progress. So if I run into that problem again, I'm able to solve it. Questions on that? Okay. Finally, last thing, and then I will shut up and show you a quick little video, and then we will dive into requirements gathering, which is the first point of the video, which we'll be planning. And I've touched on this a little bit already, but my approach to teaching is thinking like an engineer, not like a coder, right? What do I mean by that? Well, a coder is someone who is kind of focused on the tree, not the entire forest. And I know you heard me say that at orientation as well. But a coder is thinking about, what's it take to get this done? I'm just going to go line by line until everything's finished. But oftentimes you get blinded by your code, right? You're so focused in the particulars, you may realize that you're not actually meeting the requirements of what your manager or what the business is asking you to do. So when you think like an engineer, it's more planning before you go into this, right? Let's think about an architectural engineer who may be building a building, right? They don't go, all right, level one, here's the blueprint. No, where do they start? They go, well, how many floors is it in this building? What am I building this building out of? What are the requirements coming from the client? Let me start researching that. Let me start using my knowledge to start planning out this project before we get to the final version, which is handing over the blueprint with all of those details, right? And so I want you guys to think like an engineer, right? I want you guys, if you are diving in and you're in your code, to kind of think in reverse sometimes, right? Sometimes the best way to get to the finish line is to think backwards into the starting point. And so engineering is all about looking at the different pieces, breaking it down, and then diving into it. And I know that that doesn't make a ton of sense now because we haven't started on the code. But when you feel that you are stuck, or when you feel that first anticipation of starting a project, start breaking it down into pieces. And you can go completely digital with that. Again, you've heard me say use a notebook. I have seen people look like serial murders with their walls filled with post-it notes and string between them. Um, I love myself a whiteboard. I have a whiteboard in my office. I would not be the engineer I am today without a whiteboard. I have probably hundreds of pictures on my phone of me just brain dumping onto a whiteboard and then taking pictures of it and then using that for weeks at a time to actually implement on that. But you are going to have a ton of project-based hands-on learning. But just accomplishing that project, just coding along with me is not enough. What you're going to need to do and where you're going to need to excel is extracting the concepts out of that, going, all right, why is Max teaching me that? Do I understand what this syntax is? Can I do that model of see one, do one, teach one, right? It's not just enough to show up for 3 hours a day, get to the end of the class and be like, oh, it's 8:30, I'm wiped, I'm done, right? What you guys want to really focus on is, do I understand writing that code? Can I write that code myself? And can I explain that code to someone else? And that is really easy to get caught up in project-based learning where you're not doing that. You just see it done and you're like, all right, I'm finished. And so starting in week 4 or 5, at the end of the HTML section, there are 3 ways of looking at it. Project pop quiz is one of them. The other way is pushing you out of the nest. And then the third is my favorite, just yeeting you out, right? You're going to be following along this entire process. You're going to get to the end of that and you're like, all right, I'm ready for JavaScript. And what am I going to do? I'm going to spring something on you and I'm going to say, build this. And be like, I've done my homework. My homework, I built things, but what do you mean build this? And all of those projects are intentionally a little open-ended. They're a little to push you to think like that engineer, right? To start breaking that down, figuring out what is next, and go from there. Okay, a couple links at the bottom of this. Wireframe mockup and prototype we will talk about when we get back from break. I'm going to show you a quick video on the software development lifecycle. We were talking yesterday about industry terms, and like if I say this is backend, does everyone in the industry agree what a backend is? Which for the most part is true. The SDLC, the software development lifecycle, is one of those things that is an industry-wide thing. And if a software engineering team isn't using it, they probably should be, right? It is this idea of breaking down all of the different parts and realizing that what we think about software engineering, which is step 4 development here, is really only one of, 7 different pieces that make up engineering. Throughout the cohort, you will see there are concepts that are better explained by someone else on YouTube or with visuals. And so for copyright reasons, I always pause the recording. They're not part of the YouTube recording that gets posted, but I'll always share my screen so that you can see them and hear them. So let me pull that up. I have to restart my screen share so that people can hear it. Yep. And I need to pause the record cycle. It dive in when we go, no, what's the first step of that cycle? It's planning. We got to figure out what we're doing here. We've got to make sure that we do the requirement analysis and not just take the user on, hey, this is what I want, but to think about all of the things that it takes to implement that user feature and then dive into that entire life cycle again, right? So there are certainly times, especially at a smaller company, where you will either minimize or completely remove one of these steps. But it is important to think about where we will be talking about when we get back from break is design, right? Where do we start with that, right? Well, we're actually starting at requirements and then we'll go into design. But the general notion here of this is a big project. We don't want to just think like engineers. We don't want to just say we are coders, let's code something. We want to think about this entire process and also who needs to be involved in the company for that, because there may be different departments that are helping out with the design and the requirements. There also, you may be in a small enough company where you are expected to do all of them. And a client may hire you, especially as a freelancer, and go, I want my software, get to development. And you're like, can't do that, shouldn't do that. What should I do first? I want to have meetings with you. I want to make sure that we understand all of the requirements. I want to do the planning to make sure I understand the technology, anything that you're currently using already. Then I want to go into the design. Even if I'm not a graphic designer, even though I may not have a visual design background, I at least want to draw something, whether it's digitally or on a whiteboard or on a notebook, and go, is this what you want? Even if that is just boxes with things labeled, I want to make sure that we do that now, because if I build all of that out for you and then you come back to me and go, that's not what I wanted, well, it's going to take hours and hours more to fix that in your code than it would be to crumple up the piece of paper and go, all right, let's plan that out. Let's figure out what you did want. Development, obviously, you are going to learn over the next 24 weeks. The testing is okay, whether you're doing the testing or whether someone else on your team is doing the testing or you're hiring a third party. We don't want to just ship things out. We don't want to just say, hey, I think this is ready. We want to make sure that we do that internally. And sometimes with beta testers, kind of friends and family round, you may have heard of beta. There's also the alpha phase of let's think through all of this. Then the integration or deployment, that's when it gets into DevOps. And then finally, the maintenance of people are using this and they may be breaking it in ways we didn't think about. They may be requesting new features. We may be running into server performance issues, all of that kind of stuff. So your job may be one of these things. It may be all 7 of these things. But knowing what the software development lifecycle is a really important tool to go from there. Any questions on the SDLC? Okay.
Uh,
Oh,
uh,
yeah. Go for it.
yeah. It's kind of sounded like even after you do step 1 to like 7, it seemed like you still have to like, still like manage it a bit. So how does that work exactly?
Absolutely. So it depends what kind of environment you're in, right? Because you may be working in a team where you're only expected to do development and then kind of help out with the other phases because those are other people's job titles. You also may be a contractor coming in and the person who's hiring you may have 0 experience building software. And so I found a really helpful technique is to teach my clients what the software development lifecycle is, right? And I'm not asking them to do the entire software development lifecycle, but I want to provide them context, right? Because they're going to come in and go, I hired you to write code, go write code. And it's like, well, did you do the planning? Did you really think through the design of this, right? Do you have the requirements listed out? And they may come to you and go, yes, I've done steps 1 through 3. Here they all are, go code. And you can go, all right, well, as long as I understand them, I've reviewed them, I'm okay with them, I can dive right into that coding step. But oftentimes clients won't understand that there is a software development lifecycle and that it really backfires on you if you start at step 4. And so I like to provide a little bit of education on that. I don't necessarily send them a 10-minute video and ask them to go watch it, but I do like to say, hey, while I'm getting into this project, here are the phases that I go through because this is an industry standard. Once we get through these phases and we communicate what phase we're in and what we're working on, it becomes much easier to kind of track progress throughout the entire project. Development definitely tends to be the longest one, right? Which is the one we're most excited about and makes the most sense. But you may find that because there are multiple stakeholders, there are multiple people involved in the project, getting those first three steps done can be really tricky. And it's also important to recognize if you're freelancing, if you're doing contract work, you may not be very good at design, right? And it is totally fine to say, hey, I've partnered with this other UI designer who is terrible at writing code, but really great at doing design. And they may do all the design work and hand that off to you. That's totally fine, right? That's how it would work in a larger company. There is going to be a designer who specializes in that and hands you a wireframe or mock-up or even a prototype, and you go as a developer, all right, now I know how to implement this. So it just depends kind of where you're working. But as you start going through your capstone, you can start going, all right, let me think about the requirements of my capstone, right? And we're a couple of weeks away from deciding on that and getting into the details, but you can go back to tonight's class and go, well, how do we gather requirements for the car project? I need to gather those requirements and kind of list everything out. Then in tomorrow's class, we'll get into the design of things of, all right, well, no matter what system I'm doing the design on, in fact, this is a homework assignment. So this isn't something optional. This is something that you'll have to think through, right? Of how do I lay all of that out? And then the development is something that will kind of come in phases as we're learning all of it. Everything that we'll be learning will be something where you might have that light bulb moment where you go, oh, I just figured out how to build a login thing in class. I need a login thing on my capstone. So let me go move that over into that project. The testing we don't go too much into, but as a developer, there will be certain things where you go, well, let me try and break it. Let me try and make sure it's doing what I want it to do. The integration and development will be, I'm sorry, integration and deployment will be something that Nathan teaches in the DevOps modules. So you'll have 2 weeks on that. And then the maintenance, unfortunately, we don't have a ton of time to dive into that in class. But that's something that, you kind of learn as you're going of once your app is out on the internet, you're going to have users reaching out to you. You're going to find things that you wanted to work on during the project that you ran out of time to do. And then, of course, it's a cycle, right? So all of this is going to start over again. And you're going to go, oh, well, in that maintenance phase, people brought up these bugs. I need to make sure I understand what I missed in the requirements, what the new requirements are, and then go through it all over again. Any other questions?
Uh, is that also one of the reasons why so when you like code in and stuff and they leave the little comments on there, is that also another reason why they do that too?
Yeah, comments can be used for a lot of things in your code. And if you aren't familiar with comments, that's something that we will be learning in probably week 2. But comments are definitely something that can help not only for the development phase, but they can also help other engineers, right? So when other engineers come back to your code, they may look at it and go, WTF is this, right? Like, I don't understand. And so comments are really helpful for other developers. They're really helpful for you when you go back into that code. The number of times I've messaged my boss and said, who the hell wrote this? And he went, well, you. And I'm like, oh, right. I was the one who wrote this, right? So comments can be really helpful for that. Like I said, for the whole team. And they can be helpful to leave like little to-do notes of like, hey, I'm working on this. I realize that this other thing also has to be done, but I need to circle back and follow up on this. So comments can be used for a lot of different things. They're usually only used for the development team when they're in your code. But there is an entire field, and I don't know if it was on the job titles list, called technical writing, of people who are not developers, but they are familiar with the code. They're familiar with the users who will be using your final version of the code, and they write documentation. And there are hundreds of thousands of millions of pages of documentation, both for other developers who may be getting into your code, for end users who are trying to learn how to use a feature. And so comments kind of spill out into this whole world of documentation. That is something that you will be exposed to from the development perspective, but also good to think about for your users of how are users interacting with this feature. Turns out that developers tend to not be great writers when it comes to other end users, which is why technical writing is its own job title, but definitely something to think about. Do you have a question? Yeah.
So in my experience with commenting, it kind of helps to like backtracking, as we're building something. So that way you don't feel lost when you need to go reference something for let's say we all get like a coding assignment and we're just like, oh, we did this in class, but I don't remember what this code line did. The comments kind of help too, because you can like put the date and you can describe it briefly what it does. And two, again, when you go into a business and you're working with a huge team, there's going to be a lot of people who will be messing with your code and they would like to know what they're messing with, so that if they're going to add to it or to remove something, they want to know what exactly they need to be careful of removing and adjust and update.
Absolutely. Yeah. Commenting is kind of used everywhere. And we'll even have homework assignments that are, you don't have to write a line of code, but you have to comment my code, right? You have to go through what we did in class and just add context into that. And I have definitely heard from a lot of students that they felt they got to the end of class and they were like, oh, I spent 3 hours in there. I don't know what just happened. And it turns out that a lot of successful students, even though it's not necessarily a homework requirement, will take the code, which we'll upload to GitHub, and we'll show you how to access that starting next week. But they'll take the final version of the code that we wrote and just add notes to it, right? Whether that's typing in the comments, whether that's printing it out and just jotting notes down next to it, just finding a way to get it to sink in. You don't necessarily have to build it all from scratch, but just going through it and going, do I actually understand this? And can I write down line by line what is happening here? Can be a really, really great tool to make sure that it's all sinking in.
I got I
Yeah,
got one more question. I'm sorry.
yeah,
Back
go.
to the job titles for DevOps. Is that more a line of like cybersecurity, or is it more, or is it like kind of different from it?
It Cybersecurity can fall into DevOps. It doesn't always fall into DevOps. DevOps is kind of this newish industry. I don't want to say it's kind of born. DevOps has been born out of IT has been always focused more on office administration, on hardware, on the physical servers, on networking, and then the development world has obviously always been focused on code and user interface and front end and back end and all of that stuff. But there was this weird intersection where we were like, well, developers need to deploy their code, but it's not necessarily someone who specializes in asset management and making sure employees have hardware or setting up networks isn't necessarily the best person to be managing servers, right? And so when the cloud kind of started getting popular, the industry kind of split and it was like, all right, if you are a cloud expert for deploying developers' code, but you still have experience working with servers, but you're not in IT and you're not a developer, what are you? And so that's kind of where DevOps was born was, hey, I'm kind of a cloud specialist. And obviously with the cloud, we also get into security as well. So security can fall under IT. It is less common to fall under development, but there is also code level security. And then there is also security in the cloud. And you can become a cybersecurity specialist who isn't working in the cloud or code or IT, which is kind of interesting. So cybersecurity is certainly a separate job title, but like all of the job titles on that list, they can often interact with each other. And so cybersecurity can be an entire job field that you get into after this program, and you use kind of all of the knowledge of how to build applications in order to make them more secure. So it can fall under DevOps. It can fall under IT. It very rarely falls under development and front end and back end. But it can fall under all of those or none of those. It just depends on what you're expected to secure, basically. Any other questions? Okay. Before we go on break, one quick thing for you to do. We do have an attendance form in Canvas. I'm going to ask everyone to submit it in the next 5 minutes. On Canvas, if you sign in, go to our course, click on modules over on the left. There is a form right up at the top that says C6 attendance. It will be really quick for you to fill out. It's just check the box for your email, grab your name, and tonight's secret word is duck, D-U-C-K. Once you fill that out, you can go on break, be back at 7:20, and we will dive into our requirements planning session. Have to fill it out in the next 5 minutes if you want attendance for class tonight. And they are time stamped. What's that? Duck. D-U-C-K is the secret word.
So my brother-in-law has a 3D printer.
Yes.
He printed a duck for my sister.
All right, welcome back, everyone. Good news is the second half of class is a little bit more interactive. It's going to be pretty similar to our exercise yesterday, right? So you guys are going to get to ask me questions. I'm going to kind of take notes as we go. And then we will get into phase 2 of, now that we've got all of these notes, how do we start sorting through it? And then tomorrow we will do kind of a Mac 101. So if you are still a little uncomfortable with your computer, that is totally fine. We will also have the monitors in here. So if you have worked with a second monitor tomorrow, I'm going to encourage you not to unpack it just for space reasons of trying to fit everything in. But if you are someone who has not worked with an external monitor before, we will go through some apps for making window management easier. You'll have a chance to kind of unpack it and plug it in and practice moving it around and arrangement and all of that kind of stuff. Tomorrow we will go through Zoom a little bit and make sure that everyone can share their screen. While that may sound like common sense, the Mac is kind of weird with system settings and having to allow it. And then we will make sure that you are all set up for remote classes starting on Monday. Thursday's class is going to be about mentors, pairing up with them, and also a reminder that we will do professional headshots on on Thursday, and that is totally optional. So if you would like to come a little bit more gussied up for your headshot, that is totally fine. If you are like, dear God, please don't take a picture of me, that is also totally fine. But just something that we like to offer students, and you'll get the original source files and all of that good stuff. Yes. Yeah, at some point you may need a professional headshot. LinkedIn is probably the best example of it. Gets a little complicated if you want to put it on your resume, whether or not you should do that or not. I think I have mine on. I have a picture on my resume now and have been advised to remove it because it introduces prejudice into the hiring process. But anyway, at some point you will need a headshot, whether that's on your personal website, whether that's on your LinkedIn profile. With COVID, the whole world has gotten a little bit more lax on professional headshots, which is good news. But we still like to offer them just in case you want one. Any other questions for what's coming down the pipeline for the rest of the week? Anything like that?
You said the headshots was Thursday, this Thursday?
This Thursday, yeah.
Oh, okay.
So we'll have between 5 and 10 mentors here on Thursday. It will kind of be a speed dating style where all the mentors will be in a circle. Caitlin will be managing that, our program manager, on Thursday. And so we'll kind of circle around. And then if you're not getting your if you're not currently interviewing a mentor, which we'll get more into tomorrow, you'll have the opportunity to get your headshot taken. And then we'll try and get you guys out of here a little early on Thursday. Don't get used to that. That is certainly not my style. But the mentor meetup session may go a little short on Thursday. It's our first time of doing it, so bear with us. It may be a little bumpy, but I do think that the mentor program that we're setting up will benefit you guys a lot more than TAs, which we've done in previous sessions. So that's why we're doing it. Any other questions? Okay, so let's dive into the requirements gathering session. If you would like to follow along with this spreadsheet, it is in the daily outlines under day 2. The daily outlines are linked in Canvas under modules. And then the Zoom classroom link for anyone who has asked for it is also in Canvas. That link, unlike the door codes for Common Space, do not change. That will be our link the entire cohort. Please don't share it with anyone outside of the class because once you click on that, you can get in. Fortunately, never had any Zoom bombing issues, but that is the link if you are looking for it. But all the resources for every day will be in the daily outlines as we're going through that. And then also the YouTube links is a really helpful one in Canvas. Has anyone had any access either getting into Canvas, Slack, or the Latch app for access into Common Space? You should have gotten an email today. If you said yes to a membership, that will allow you to use your phone to unlock the door or tap your phone instead of having to use the persnickety door codes.
I can't tell if my latch works because I already had the app from the last cohort, obviously. But I clicked yes, but it's not showing like I have like it's put under like doors. It's nothing there. So I don't know if I should do I have to recreate a new account or what's going on.
Um,
It's not listed under my spaces.
Remind me at the end of class, or if you're in person tomorrow,
Hmm.
let me take a look at it because I do see on my side that you're listed and it does show that you have access to those doors. So if we can't figure it out, I may have to contact Latch support.
Hmm.
Um, because everything does look right on my side. Um, oh, that's a good sign out and sign back in and see if that triggers anything.
I'll try it again. Let's see.
Um, and the other thing too is in the app, it just says CS Warren, and then you have to like tap on the little
Hmm.
expansion. So I don't know if you can see CS Warren and it's just collapsed.
It is not, unfortunately. I did
The other
remember
thing
that.
is you might have to accept the invite from the email. Like it
Hmm.
may not just work, but you might have to click on the link and then that's what will add it back into your account.
Okay, I'm gonna try that and we'll see. I'll let
Yeah,
you know how it goes.
perfect. Sounds good. Any other questions? Yeah. No, it is not. Yeah, just fill that out. And then shoot me a Slack message when you're done with it, just as a reminder for me to process it. Any other questions? That is in assignments, by the way, if you're looking for it. Okay, let's dive in. So this is meant to be a very kind of natural process. You would be surprised the number of times you're going to walk into a company and they're going to ask you for something in a big meeting with 20 people in it. And you're going to be like, who's taking the lead here, right? How's this going to go? So I'm going to repitch the assignment to you. I am an eccentric car CEO. I have decided that in the effort of minimalism, I would like you to design a user interface for the touchscreen that controls most of the car's functions. Go. Great question to start with. So we are the steering wheel, the turn signal, the gear selector, the windows, and the door opens. Yes.
What side is the driver?
The driver will sit on the left side. Yes. So it is an electric car, but other than that, it will be all like a car that you have driven in the past, other than it being on a touchscreen.
The operating system.
It is a Linux-based operating system, but the user interface is totally up to you to control and design. Windows.
To connect to an app.
It will connect to an app, but you are not required
He
to
poop.
design that part of it.
Amel, come here.
No,
Ah,
you're unmuted. Yeah.
Oops, sorry, lost my train of thought, man.
It's all right. Other questions?
How many seats?
5 seats. So other than safety concerns, they should be able to control pretty much everything from this touchscreen. So they don't necessarily have to get into like diagnostics, but as a general car driver, they should be able to control it.
How long is it?
15 inches. There is a self-driving option. However, you aren't required to design that aspect of it.
Yeah, accessibility issues to it, though, or whether you can read or you need large print or.
I would say that accessibility is something that is important in the design, but not something that you have to like overly, it's not like you have accessibility requirements that you need to meet. So common sense things like the text needs to be large enough, but not something to the point of like you have to make sure you're meeting contrast requirements or
Settings saying accessibility.
no, yeah, you don't have to get into that level, but it should be an important part of the design in terms of thinking about usability. Yes. So voice control is, I'll label that as optional. Anything that you can control for voice should also have a non-voice way of interacting with it. But the voice control is activated from the steering wheel, so that's not something that you need to build into the design.
How big do you want the tires?
So we don't have to worry about the tires because it's not part of the user interface, right? So we're focused only on what's going to show up on that touchscreen. And unless the tires are an integral part of day-to-day operations of the car, you don't necessarily have to worry about the tires.
And my question is regarding privacy. Are there options for multiple profiles or gas?
Yeah. So multiple profiles can be supported.
Can you download third-party apps?
No third-party apps. Because we would like you to capitalize on the larger screen space that CarPlay can't support or Android Auto can't support at the moment, there's no Apple CarPlay or Android Auto. It is a 15-inch landscape touchscreen that is as responsive as a modern smartphone or tablet. Yes. Landscape, yes.
I was going to add, will the cruise control function be supported?
So cruise control status needs to be reported, but not engaged from touchscreen. So basically, because that's on the wheel, you won't have to build it into the interface.
What market would be?
The US market at a average US car sales price point.
What extent are we concerned about the data? Going back to privacy, the data management on the end, you know, how much of the client's or customer data is set up?
We can say that that only the data required to update the mobile app will be sent up to the cloud. Everything else will be managed on premises, so basically on the car.
There's no third-party apps, so like, is there some sort of integrated safety program, like how people have like 5-star, basically crash, like crash detection?
We will say that it relies on the Bluetooth connection of the phone in order to connect you to emergency services.
Paid subscription, activating features.
The only paid subscription is if you would like streaming music. What's that? Yeah. We'll say that because the mobile app isn't required, we don't have to dive into that as much.
For the vehicle be able to like diagnostic stuff, like you can see like the tires and like the air pressure, if something was out, like a tail light, might need oil, things on there.
No oil, but other than that, yes. So yes, the car should report. I did not spell diagnostic right. Should report diagnostic information, and that is intentionally vague, right? So tire pressure is a great example, but are your headlights on, right, or that kind of information should definitely be built into the UI. Great question. So the car should be able to display maps, take address input, and display turn-by-turn directions. The car supports cameras, but is not required for the UI. Yeah.
Will be able to like sense gestures, like you want to wave, like
No gesture support.
Would it also allow for separate user profiles for each user?
Yeah, so we've got multiple profiles can be supported.
Well, like, can it store like damage report, like so say the car is sitting and somebody hits it with a car or somebody hits it with a.
We'll say that that kind of falls under the car has cameras, but you don't need to integrate it into the interface.
What about battery life and charging stations?
Yeah. Battery life must always be displayed on the screen. Charging stops can be built into the GPS system. Yeah. We'll say that's all kind of mobile app. Weather is oddly not supported. Factored into your range, but oddly not supported it. All right, so let's take a step back. These are all really good questions, right? But these might be a little bit more vague. So they are great for going, all right, this is a brand new car. We're building it from the ground up. We've got general questions. But oftentimes when we think about building an app or a user interface, we want to think about previous experience, right? Because every one of us has used an app, has used probably 10 apps in the past 2 days of this cohort alone, right? So let's start drawing on our experience. When you get in the car, what are common things that you interact with in your car that will also probably be in this car? Seatbelts, but not necessarily in the user interface. Or if it is, it falls under the car diagnostics, right, of how things are reported. Starting the car, that's a great question. Car is started. The car is started by your butt. You sit in the seat and the car is started. Does your car sense for underage drivers? So it doesn't.
Support like the blow to start, like if you got like
No BAC requirement to drive. No BAC or age requirement, I guess I should throw in there.
I would say that it will have like face recognition, so if someone tries to
I don't know you.
No face recognition, but will support key from your phone.
Climate control.
Climate control, that's a huge one that we're missing, right? Climate control must be supported on touchscreen. It does have heated seats. No. What's that? Yes. No, cool heated steering wheel.
are able to like use the interface to adjust your seat, your seat height and distance.
Seat control is adjusted from seat, not UI.
You open your hood, trunk, doors, or gas cap.
You open the trunk, the charging port, and the front trunk must be openable from the screen.
You need to incorporate or reconcile redundant controls, like having volume in a menu and also having a volume knob.
Volume must be controllable in the screen.
Do we allow for personalization, like screensaver?
Personalization is supported in V2. So you don't have to worry about it.
Oh,
What about adding the radio?
Radio, whoa, big one. So let's dive into that a little bit more. What does music control mean? You already said it. We probably want to support streaming in this car. It's pretty advanced, right? We want to have Spotify or Apple Music. We also, by law, have to support FM radio, FM and AM radio for safety. Must be able to switch music source. Someone said lights. Like we got to be able to control the car, right? So car controls like headlights must be integrated.
Drive modes?
Different drive modes. Let's say I'll throw that in with car controls. The gear shifter is hardware and not required to control on the screen, but must display the status. So in other words, we don't need to be able to shift from the screen, but we got to know that we're in driver park. Yes, and I'm going to lump that under diagnostic information of the car's general status, whether it's headlights, the doors are open, the trunk is open, tire pressure is low, check engine light is on, all of that stuff I'm going to lump under car diagnostics. Windows are, controlled from the door. Yeah, windows are controlled from the door.
Should there be anything in there that keeps the car from operating at all? Or should there be some control that says, nope, you can't run the car today?
We'll lump that under car diagnostics.
How about voice control?
Voice control, we said, is optional, but activated from the steering wheel, not the touchscreen. Must be able to switch music source. Yep. We'll lump that under like car diagnostics because I think like an airbag light would be with the check engine light kind of thing. So we'll lump all of that together.
Auto start probably be the control. I don't know if you've been in a car when you can turn off auto start. Auto, it's like it shuts off at the lights and then you can turn it off.
So because it's an electric car, there is no engine to turn on or off. Yep.
Honestly, what if we went to the case of like, what if the interface is like overloaded and like it's running multiple things at the same time? How do we? I'm trying to think of how to do that.
Like multitasking.
Yeah. So that would deal with like.
So we'll kind of solve that problem somewhat proactively by saying only two windows will be displayable at the same time.
So, does it have any sort of input output ports for like when I put a USB in for some reason? Hold music.
We'll kind of lump that under like being able to switch between, but there's no direct MP3 playback support, which I think kind of gets around needing to think about the USB port. Oh yeah, go ahead.
We got music. Do we have anything for entertainment?
We will say that entertainment is supported in V2. Go ahead.
Yeah, some cars won't give you sync devices while you're driving.
We'll say driver lockout is not required to be designed, but will be implemented in development.
Will it support hands-free following?
Oh, that's a big one, right? Must support Bluetooth calling. Auto drive, autopilot must be reported. Autopilot status must be reported, but doesn't need to be activated from the screen. With what? No sunroof. Surprisingly, unfortunately. We'll say that the robot AI is kind of all part of the autopilot, but there's no like AI to interact with other than the voice control system. Okay, so you got in your car today. You drove here, assuming that you did. What was something that you did, not opening the door and not touching the steering wheel, that you did in your car? Bluetooth will say is under supporting switching music sources. But what we probably haven't covered on that is pairing, right? Because Bluetooth doesn't just work. We got to have some kind of settings menu for Bluetooth pairing. The time will be set by the internet. The car is 4G internet connected. We'll say that isn't no internet connection will be implemented in depth.
What about collision detection?
No internet hotspot. Collision detection can be reported with other alerts in car status.
You said there were cameras on the car?
There are cameras, but you don't have to worry about implementing it in the UI.
You'll playback option for the.
Correct.
Does it allow the dashboard to store emergency contacts for each user?
We'll say that that's handled by the phone, or know that it just defaults to calling 911.
Will this need to report up to a black box?
No black box requirements. So things that I'm thinking of are, we said that it requires Bluetooth for music, and we've talked a little bit about calling, but we also probably need some way to initiate the call beyond the phone, right? Or beyond so we also need to think about phone calling interface required. We touched on climate, which is good. We've touched on music and changing sources. We've touched on GPS, and we've touched on car status. Yeah. Settings. Settings must be supported. And I'm going to leave that kind of vague because we've already talked a little bit about settings, right? We've talked about phone connection. We've talked about drive mode. We want to kind of think through what all of those different settings are, and think about how we want to design that menu.
Would it be responsive to like text, like read your text? I know in my Beamer, like if a text message come through, read it to me.
Reading text messages aloud is optional. Notification center is up to UI designer to decide what alerts are priority and which ones can be displayed in a menu. So what I mean by that is, hey, if I have a low tire pressure, I probably want to see that no matter what is on the screen. But if there is some notification like camera quality degraded or something that is, like less important, you can still display that to the user, but it's not going to necessarily be prominently displayed. Same for like a text message, right? We probably want to get alerted that there's a text message, but we also want to have a way to dismiss that text message if we don't want it read aloud. No app store. We have no third-party apps on the list. User manual is not a user manual will be a V2 feature.
Can you adjust the mirrors?
Mirrors must be adjustable from screen. Great question. That's a good hidden one.
What about like the wipers?
Wipers must be adjustable from screen. Locking the car must be controllable. Two else? Child lock is V2.
We have an internet browser.
Internet browser is V2. Windshield defrost must be part of climate controls.
Probably able to do like a sentry mode, kind of like the.
Sentry mode is V2. The cameras, it's all part of the camera system. So like think about dash cam recording. Sentry mode and dash cam is V2. So basically not a requirement, even though it will be part of the car. Anti-theft we'll say that locking and unlocking the doors is all that you need for anti-theft. Blind spot alerts must be integrated into the alert system from number 53, right? So basically that would be a priority alert, but we want to start to think about prioritizing our alerts and where they display and if they make a noise and that kind of stuff.
GPS.
Yep. GPS traffic is optional.
How about lane keeping?
Lane keeping and other safety alerts must be considered as number 53, right? So that's another one for the alert system where we go, all right, we got to start figuring that out. Alarm is going to be part of the door lock, so we don't have to worry about it.
You have a speedometer, odometer.
Oh, that's kind of an important one. We're down to 65 and we haven't thought about how fast the car is going. That's
On the dash.
Yeah, I thought that was bad. You gotta look over.
so sorry, I should have been more clear. This is the only screen in the car. So we did think about that all the way up here. Battery life must always be displayed. Yeah, we got that one.
Oh, would it be some sort of like command prompt or like hitting settings menu for manufacturers or repair people?
We'll say that that isn't a requirement for V2.
Did we say that like gas meter?
Yep, we got that up here. Battery life must always be displayed. We'll say mileage can be reported with diagnostic info. We did get that. Charging stops can be built, so it's optional.
What about showing the condition for the airbag?
The airbags will lump into the diagnostic information. Tire pressure, all of everything that you think of a normal warning light, we have to consider, but we don't necessarily have to design each one of those warning lights, if that makes sense. We'll say night mode is V2. Drivetrain, we do have the gear selector, gear shifters, hardware are not required to be controlled, but must display what gear you're in, the status of it. Mileage we just got as can be reported with diagnostic info. Think back to your car. What's something that you've had to either do on the touchscreen that you've had to do in the center control stack?
Oh,
yeah.
I went to Canada and I had to really pay attention to like the km kilometers, but it like switch automatically.
We'll say km versus mph can be controlled in settings.
Where it knows where you're at, and it's like, oh, you're in Canada, let's switch it over to Canada for you.
Legally, they can't do that because there are requirements that cars can display both of them. But if you display one over the other, certain states will actually require that MPH is like shown in that. So I think that there's a legal requirement that they can't auto switch it over because they had an issue that when you put the car in track mode, it was displaying your speed in feet per minute, and it couldn't. I'm not a car racer, but apparently that violated the safety law, and so they had to like push out a software update to say that like in addition to the feet per minute, it displayed miles an hour at the same time.
Oh, are software updates automatic, or can you choose?
Great question. Software updates will be controlled in settings. Traction control will put as drive mode, which I said drive modes must be integrated in car controls. Headlights. Yes. No ambient lighting. Or if you wanted to, it would be in settings. Temperature, we do have under climate. Climate control must be supported on the touchscreen. But whoever ends up with that one, you're going to want to think through all of the different things that are in climate, right? Because we have no climate vents that are controllable. We have no temperature knobs. We have no climate direction, feet or middle or both. What's that? There are no vents. We are going for the most minimalist car you can think of. So that must be controlled on the touchscreen. I'll throw that on here. Vent control must be in climate section. Did I hear something else?
Is there any reason why we're going to we need to have a lit home mode?
V2. Actually, I don't. Well, what we will put on here is low battery alert can be considered. We'll say that's in like the mobile app, so you don't have to worry about it.
We have battery life on it. We have like miles.
Yeah, we'll throw that in there. Range in miles, we'll just say that's V2, so you don't have to worry about it. Interior lights are actually controlled from the inside of the car by just pushing on them. Oh, I mean, they turn on when the door opens, but are controllable via a wheel button.
Window locks, especially child locks.
Yeah, so we'll just say, I think we got child locks. Yeah, child locks and window locks, we'll just say is V2.
Did we do seatbelt detection?
Seatbelt we got under like general car status. That back. All right, last call for questions. All right, so oftentimes when we start designing our UI, we will have questions that pop up as we go, right? We'll start designing it and we'll start going, oh, well, do the heated seats have a medium, low, high, or are they just on or off, right? Or we'll have just random little questions that pop up along the way. That is totally part of the process. And as you guys are designing the UI tomorrow, you'll have the opportunity to ask those questions as they pop up. But thinking about next steps on this project, if I were handed this list, I would still look at this list and go, well, this is all helpful information, but I still have no idea where to start, right? So this is where we go from requirements and general planning into more of a dedicated requirements area. What did we do yesterday that made our list of 80 different stacks more manageable, more approachable? We categorize them. So that's what we're going to do here. Because if we start to categorize these and think, all right, is this general information, right, which the whole team should know, but we don't necessarily need to assign to one particular team, or is this something that a team should be generated and we should sort those things out? Because 20 people are going, if 20 people design a UI, you're going to get to the end of that, and all 20 people are going to have a different idea, and you're going to go, well, how do we put all of these together, right? And so what the plan will be is tomorrow, well, depending on how much time we have tonight, we're going to start thinking through what's the layout that everyone agrees on, right? When you are building an app for the Mac, you don't have any control of that top bar that has the Apple logo at the top, and you don't have any control of the dock down at the bottom. And if we think about that, that is true for our phones, where we have the home screen that the developer can't control, but then they control the whole experience once they get into it. And then even once you're in an app, there are certain design patterns that we use every day that we may not have thought about, right? Of, oh, A lot of apps have a tab bar at the bottom. Maybe that's something we should implement in this design. So after we categorize all of this, we're going to start thinking through what needs to be on the display at all times. How are we going to agree as a team that we're going to switch between these things? And then from there, we can break out into the teams and say, all right, this is the space that we've all agreed that you get to design. And we're going to say, you get on the climate, you get on the GPS. We're going to go through this list, identify those different teams. And then you guys are going to have some time tomorrow after we learn Figma to actually implement those designs. So let's go through this list and start categorizing things out. So drivers on the left side, info. The wheel, turn signals, gear selector, all info. Same, self-driving, touchscreen, info, voice control. Because we said it's optional, we don't need a team for it. Multiple profiles can be supported. Let's lump that under, we'll call it always on, right? There are certain things that we always want to display in the screen, and that needs probably a dedicated team to figure out. There's going to be a lot of information that needs to be displayed. What's that? Positioning of that information, what information needs to be displayed, where we're going to display it, what's most accessible. Those are all a lot of factors, right? So we probably want a dedicated team just for that. Yeah. That's a great question. 15-inch touchscreen is centered on dash between driver and passenger. What?
Right, well, that's why I'm asking.
Yeah, I mean, it's a legitimate question, right? Like, we could put that screen anywhere. So yeah. Okay. No third-party apps, just info. No Android CarPlay, info. Touchscreen info. Here, let me try and make these a little bit more readable. Okay. Cruise control status. That's probably going to be part of the always on, right? We kind of always want to see if we've got cruise control on or not. Oh, sorry. Info always on. I think that's more info, right? Because it's not something that we necessarily need to implement. It's not something that we need to design in. It's kind of just something we want to keep in mind as we're going about it. Emergency services via car Bluetooth. I'm going to put this under, we're going to say phone is going to be its own team, right? Because we know further down that list, we've got to think about the dialing. We've got to think about, are you on a call? We've got to think about how long were you on the call? We got to think about mute and unmute. We got to think about hang up. Those are all things where it's like, well, those are all buttons on our phone, right? When we are making a phone call, even for something that seems as simple as that, there's still a lot of planning that goes into all of those different buttons that need to be on the screen. So we're going to dedicate an entire team just to the phone. But I will say that if you get caught on the phone team, you do not have to worry about the music of the phone, but you do need to worry about the pairing of the phone. Okay. Only paid subscription and streaming music. This one's kind of a hidden one because we think that's just info, but we've really got the whole music to think about, and we've got multiple sources of that music. So we're going to say that there's going to be a audio team. Now let's call it the music team. So that music team is going to, if it's other than the phone, right, they're going to be responsible for what music is playing, how do we switch the sources, what sources are we going to support, how do we tune the radio, all of that stuff is going to fall under that music team. Diagnostic information. I think that's going to be in the always on. Car should be able to display maps. I don't know. That seems like a pretty big task, huh? So we're gonna send that all under the GPS team or the maps team, however you want to think about it. Car is the cameras is just info. Gesture support, because we don't need it, is also info. Battery life must always be on, always on. Charging stops, we'll put that under GPS, but keep in mind that this is optional. So as you're designing, you're also going to want to prioritize things because you're only going to have a certain amount of time to work on this, right? So at the end of tomorrow, me as your boss is going to come around and go, show me what you got. And if you show me something and I'm like, well, that seems like a pretty minor feature, where's the general functionality? You're going to have to prioritize tomorrow and think about what features are the most important. So even though we're doing requirements now, you still are going to want to do some planning tomorrow and come up as a team to think about, well, what features are we going to attack first? Cars started by the butt, we'll call that info. No, you cannot. Well, yes, you can. You can get your butt out of the seat and then it turns it off. So we'll call that always on. The main reason behind that is you don't need to start an engine, and so there's no reason to put a key in because your phone is the key, and then there's no reason to start the engine, so there's no safety concerns. So that's why. No, you don't. And I think we even have no age requirement or weight requirement. I will say, though, that that is a very decisive thing in the EV industry right now of whether people want a start button in their car or whether they don't. So you guys are not alone in thinking that that's kind of a weird feature. Not all car manufacturers are going that route, just to throw that out there. Okay, info for the age requirement, same for face recognition, climate control. I don't know. I think that might be our first climate, but when we think about all of the buttons that we have on our climate control, and then even additional things like being able to control the vents, that's going to be a huge interface to think about, right? And things like heated seats, we're also going to put that in climate, but then I will also put in here, is there something here with the always on team? So all of these teams are going to have to collaborate with whoever ends up on the always on team because you're all going to want to have something that is reported in the always on, right? I may want, as the climate team, to always display the temperature of the car, but that isn't on me to decide that. I can't just go into their designs and start putting things in there. So oftentimes on UI teams, we're going to have cross collaboration where we're going to request something. And you may say, I would like all of my climate to be always on. And the climate team's going to go, well, tough shit, right? Like there's only so much screen space. So part of the always on team is not only going to be thinking about what you would like to be always on, but then going to the other teams and saying, what would you guys like? Or that team going to the always on team to kind of figure out what gets displayed, what do we compromise on, what do we agree to. We'll say heating steering wheel is climate. Seat control, because it doesn't need to be in the UI, is just info. We will say that there is a controls and settings team for the trunk, because as we start going through some of these other things, there are things that we said we got to do, but they don't necessarily have to be in always on, right? So we don't always necessarily need our wiper controls on the screen, but we need a quick way to get to that. So part of that controls and settings team is going to be figuring out, okay, we're not the always on team, but what is the main thing that gets displayed here? What are the important controls and what controls can we maybe bury in different menus? So that's another thing to think about is some of you guys are going to design one very complicated screen. Other teams are going to design multiple screens and be able to show when you click on this, this is what shows up. So that's another thing to factor in here of we also have navigation to think about. And so, like I said, as a group, we're going to say, all right, this is the basic area of what the always on team controls. But as you guys are thinking about this, that's an important thing to think about. Does this need to be in another screen? Do we need to navigate to it? And if we navigate to it, is there something like a back button, or where are the tabs showing up for that? All of those things are to think about. Volume control, we will put in the always, we'll put in music and also think about always on. Personalization, info, music control, music, streaming music, AM, FM music, switching source music. Car controls we'll put under controls and settings. Gear shifter we will put under always on. Two windows displaying at the same time. We'll put as info. We'll kind of talk about that when we agree on the starting point tomorrow. No direct MP3 playback info or music. Entertainment, because we're not doing it, is info. Driver lockout info. Bluetooth calling falls under phone. Autopilot will put in always on. No sunroof info. If anyone disagrees with me, feel free to say you're droning on. I don't agree with that. Settings will put, I think called controls and settings. Time is info. Info. Always on. Info. Phone. Controls and settings. We'll say phone / always on. Yeah, let's say and settings. That's going to be an interesting one to collaborate on. The notifications we are going to say also has to be between always on and settings, right? Because we're going to want to display the less priority alerts in the settings. But then we're also going to want to work with the always on team to have some kind of alert area. That's kind of planned out. Controls. Controls or always on. Control. Oh, we said that's V2. It isn't actually V2. It is in controls and settings, but just for the sake of the number of things controls and settings have to do. Climate on windshield. Info. Yep. Maps. Always on.
And control the settings, because some cars you can turn it off the lane.
That's a good point. Always on. We're gonna actually put that under settings because it's, believe it or not, it's less important than you think.
Oh, for EV.
Well, in terms of you only have so much screen space, so do you always want to be displaying your mileage, or do you only care about your mileage like when you take it in for a tune-up or so I'm just gonna leave that there because always on is gonna probably ride against me tomorrow and want to kill me. So I'm just gonna try and reduce their load a little bit. Night mode is V2. Settings. What happened to my, oh, there we go.
Control and settings.
Yeah. Info and then info. Because it's, you don't have to design it in. Okay. As we're thinking about this, you should be leaning into what team do I want to be on tomorrow? Oh, wait until you get into maps. Because maps, you got to think about turn by turn. You have to think about what direction is the map displaying in. You got to think about zoom in and zoom out. You've got to think about, can I see the whole route or just the section that I'm in right now? That's a consideration, right? That would be a good question for tomorrow. And I'd say that's optional. And that actually came out in a software update. Enough people complained that they couldn't add a stop on their route, and they added that feature. You got to think about time to destination. You got to think about how many miles. You got to think about the ETA display time. You've got to think about what's that? Yeah. Are you going to show traffic? Are you going to show road hazards? Are you going to be able to support? Are you going to get into Waze-like features and report a cop? All kinds of information there, where maps is one of those things where, oh, it sounds easy. I have to be able to enter an address. But what happens when you're entering an address? I got to think through a keyboard. There's no keyboard built into the car. So I got to think about how that displays. And then I also have to think about, well, once I enter that address, how does it show me my options, right? And so that's one of those places where you think maps, oh, that's one screen, right? And then you go, no, but if I'm the designer, I have to design all of these things because I don't want to hand them to the developer. The first thing the developer is going to do is put it in some stupid place that isn't thought out. And then where I'm going to have to pay the consequence for that. So tomorrow, you're going to want to think through all those design elements, right? And be as thorough as you can, but also realize that you're under a time crunch here. So you want to still focus on the most important features. And the lens that you want to be thinking about all of this is, if I handed this to my parents and said, this is what I am building, would my parents be able to understand that? So that's what we want to think about, because oftentimes as developers, we are going to not have complete designs and then really regret that as we're coding things out, because we're going to go, oh, I didn't think about that popping up, or I don't know where that's going to go. So tomorrow we will spend a little bit of time on Figma. We will spend time on kind of Mac 101 and getting comfortable with your monitors. We will talk briefly about what you should be thinking about asking your mentor during the speed dating session on Thursday. And then we will give you time to work on teams on this. The good news is the bad news is you have to turn something in. The good news is you don't need to fully complete this. And then if you guys are curious, I will have a video from my car of how this is actually implemented, and how they actually thought through all of this stuff and how it's all controlled. So you get to see a real world example of how this all turns out. That's all I have for you tonight. Full 9 minutes early. Pretty proud of that. You guys have a good night. I will stick around for any questions as always. Otherwise, I will see you tomorrow for day 3.
That was fun.